Welcome to the 1995 ISDC. We're running a little bit late. We're hoping to be able to catch up. Dr. Robert Zubrin is going to be our next presenter, and he is currently a staff engineer at Martin Marietta Astronautics. He holds a master's degree in aeronautics and astronautics and a doctorate in nuclear engineering. He's the inventor of several unique concepts for space propulsion and exploration, the author of over 90 published technical and non-technical papers in the field, and is a member of Martin Marietta's elite scenario development team charged with developing broad new strategies for space exploration. Dr. Zubrin will be talking about propellants on Mars. Please welcome Dr. Robert Zubrin.
What I want to talk about is a hardware demonstration project that we did at Martin Marietta, or Lockheed Martin, to show that you can make rocket fuel on Mars out of Martian air. And as I've pointed out on previous talks, and I'll discuss again somewhat in my talk tomorrow on colonizing Mars, if you can make your rocket fuel on Mars, you're an awful lot of the way towards getting humans to Mars, because it means that you don't have to haul it out with you. And the rocket fuel to come back is most of what you have to send to Mars. If you can make your fuel to come home living off the land, you can reduce the mass of the mission by a factor of 3 and reduce the cost of the mission by even more. So, but what we did here was we decided we would demonstrate that this in fact could be done using a practical process. And we actually built our machine to be full scale, not for an actual manned mission, but for a Mars sample return mission, which is also a mission of great interest to the scientific community, and which would be a demonstration for doing it on an even larger scale with the Humans to Mars program. So the process that this is all based on is called the Sabatier electrolysis, or SE process. And the essence of how it works is shown in this diagram. Okay, you take a small amount of hydrogen with you to Mars, okay, and then you suck in the Martian air, which is carbon dioxide, 95%. And these two will react in what's called the Sabatier reactor, named after a chemist who lived in the 1890s, who did a lot of work with this. CO2 and hydrogen will react to produce methane, natural gas, excellent rocket fuel, okay, and water. The methane you tap off and put that in your fuel tank. The water you take and you electrolyze it, split it into hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen that comes off is, of course, your oxidizer to burn the rocket fuel, and the hydrogen is recycled to make more methane and water, and so forth and so on. And if you do this set of reactions alone, you'll turn every ton of hydrogen brought to Mars will turn into 12 tons of methane oxygen bipropellant on the surface of Mars. It's a leverage of 12 to 1, it's excellent, and it ends up with a specific impulse of 380 seconds. And there are various tricks you can do to add on to this system that can get the leverage up to more like 18 to 1. So that's the essence of it. And just for purposes of understanding this thing, because there is another leading candidate for in-situ propellant production, which there's been a significant amount of work done on, called zirconia cells, which directly dissociate CO2 into carbon monoxide and oxygen. I understand there was a demonstration of such a device here on Thursday. That will work. However, the problem with it is that it is much more energy expensive. This shows a direct comparison of the performance achieved in real machines by the two processes today. Okay? These numbers are our actual performances, and these numbers here represent the best performances achieved at the University of Arizona, which is where the best zirconia cell work has been done. Okay. We are producing 1/2 kilogram of oxygen and 1/4 kilogram of methane a day for 160 watts power, okay, which is 4.5 grams per watt per day. Okay. In their best machine, they produced 0.12 kilograms of oxygen a day, no methane, for 250 watts. Okay. So they're producing 1/7 the propellant for 1.5 times the power, and the net result of that is a figure of merit of 0.48 grams per watt day, a factor of 10 worse in terms of energy economy for amount of propellant produced. And what that translates into, if you look at all the power required to do, for instance, a sample transmission, which is not just the chemical synthesis, but also power for CO2 acquisition and for propellant liquefaction. Okay. In this case, the total power would be 280 watts, which is a standard RTG, or perhaps could be done by solar panels on the surface of Mars. This is 1,400 watts, which is impossible even with RTGs. You would need 5 RTGs, which is simply not a reasonable proposition. If we were to go to a larger scale mission, like the Johnson Space Center's version of Mars Direct, their design reference mission, this process could do it for 25 kilowatts, which could be a small nuclear reactor. This would need 127 kilowatts, which would be a much larger power system, and pose significant difficulties in developing that compared to this. So that is why we chose to look at this process. Because despite the fact that you have to transport hydrogen to Mars, the hydrogen is only a very small fraction of the propellant you generate, and the power consumption is reduced here by about a factor of 5, and that is absolutely critical to make this a practical way of doing the mission. So, that said, let's talk about the demonstration work. I showed you the simplified diagram of what this is. If you get around to designing it, your diagram starts to get a little more complicated, and it starts looking like this. And this was the design of our phase 1 system. There are 2 rounds of this work that I'm going to report to you today. The first round took place in the fall, actually December 1993 through January 94, and the second round took place almost exactly a year later, in November, December 94. And in the first generation system, all we demonstrated was the actual chemical synthesis operation. That is to say, we took CO2 and hydrogen directly out of compressed bodies, okay, and we turned them into methane and oxygen gas, and then we sampled the gas to assess its quality and how much conversion we had achieved, and we just threw it away. And that was the first generation system. And I might add that this was done on an extremely limited budget, $47,000 complete, and also on a 3-month timeline. It took us a month to design this, a month to wait for the parts to arrive in the mail, 2 weeks to build it, and we had 2 weeks of running time to demonstrate that it worked. This is faster, better, cheaper. Much faster, much cheaper. So what does this stuff look like? Well, we built the Sabatier reactor from scratch, and it's shown here. This is a Sabatier reactor. This is 14 inches long, and 2 inches in diameter, and it's about a little less than half filled with a ruthenium on alumina catalyst. And these are nichrome heaters strapped around it, which you would heat it to around 300 centigrade to get it started. And then you input the gases, and at 300 centigrade they react well, and they produce heat. Enough heat, in fact, to keep it pretty warm so that you can greatly turn down the power required to run it. Because we were on such a short timeline, we over-designed this system. As it turned out, we over-designed it by at least a factor of 10 in required volume. It's much bigger than it needs to be, but we're not going to have time to rebuild it if we had gone too small. So that's why it's as big as it is. And unfortunately, while that did guarantee that it worked quite well, it made it so big that it had a large heat leak, so that we had to keep sub-power in the heaters all during operation, around 50 watts, even after it was up and running, because it was so large. In our next generation machine, not the one I'm going to show you, but the one we're building now, we're going to make this about the size of a ballpoint pen. that's how much smaller it's going to be. It's going to be about the size of someone's finger. That person was a little taller than me. So here it is. That's the Sabatier reactor. These are flow meters for measuring the flow of hydrogen and CO2 into the machine and so forth. The electrolyzer is shown here. This is actually the limiting thing on the production rate of the device. That is, that Sabatier reactor that you see there is, as I said, at least 10 times the size we require for our production rate. So it could be a lot smaller, or correspondingly, it could produce much more propellant than we're actually making. This thing, though, is the electrolyzer. This is actually originally a Hamilton standard electrolyzer, which then later in life was put in a packaged instrument hydrogen laboratory source, only to be untimely ripped out of it by our technicians and put here. This thing weighs 3 kilograms wet, that is when filled with water. The Sabatier reactor you see there weighs around 10 kilograms, but as I say, I think it could be reduced to around 1. So this weighs 3 kilograms, and this uses 120 watts of power to produce the amount of propellant we're making. And that's a number you're going to have a hard time getting away from, because it's about 85% efficient. This is a small, elegant, and extremely sophisticated device. It's the product of hundreds of millions of dollars of your tax money at work for the Navy nuclear submarine program. And it can withstand very large shocks, including depth charging. So it ought to be able to take a mission to Mars. And there it is. It's about 10 inches tall, 2 inches in diameter on the tower, 5 inches in diameter on the base. Okay. This then is the whole machine, phase 1 machine you see here in the early stage of checkout. And you can see as I said, the CO2 would come in here, the hydrogen would come in here. They mix in here to make methane and water. The water is condensed out in this condenser loop here and accumulates in this water bottle. The methane would be tapped off to be sampled by a gas mass spectrometer or chromatography. We had both techniques. And the water would then go through here into the electrolyzer to be split into hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen could be tapped off and sampled, and then the hydrogen would be recycled back into it. And so that is the core chemical system for a Mars propellant maker. Later on, in order to reduce the amount of power needed to keep that Sabatier reactor in steady state, we just put some foam insulation around it, as you see here. There's foam around the Sabatier reactor. This graph shows the yields we achieved as a function of the temperature of the Sabatier reactor, which we could regulate simply by adjusting the electrical heaters. And you can see we reached, well, in the phase 1, we reached 94% conversion efficiency at a temperature of a little over 300 centigrade, beyond which it did not improve much. That is because as you increase the temperature, while the reaction goes faster, the equilibrium of the reaction favors less reaction, so it's flattened out there. And then if you went below 280, the efficiencies dropped off rather sharply. It's just not hot enough to get the job done. But we got 94% efficiency. Actually, we got 67% efficiency the first day we turned the machine on. By the end of the first week, we were up to 85%, and then by the end of the second week, when we ran out of money, we were up to 94%. And because we were twiddling with the machine. Because of the extremely accelerated nature of this program, in other words, in an aerospace company with all the overheads that you have, every hour of actual tech time you pay many times over, and we could simply not afford to do certain things. And so, like, we actually had to, the flow meter maker had said these instruments are guaranteed to be accurate within 2%. We took them at their word. We were getting some very strange results. and we couldn't understand it. There were alternate explanations. I said ultimately those flow meters have to be wrong. The technicians refused to believe it. We calibrated the flow ultimately by bubbling water up into an inverted graduated cylinder, immersed in water, and yes, they were off by 25%. And once we recalibrated them, we were able to get the machine's yields up quite high. So that was phase one. But as I said, in phase one, we had a simplified setup in that we were able to take the gas right out of gas bottles in compressed form, feed them right into the machine, spoon feed it as it were, and we just release the propellant in gaseous state. Phase two, which began in the summer of '94, when we had renewed funding from NASA Johnson Space Center. David Kaplan was the program manager there. We augmented the machine considerably with devices that could actually acquire CO2 out of the Martian atmosphere with Mars atmospheric gas, with all its impurities, at Mars atmospheric pressure, less than 1% of Earth's atmospheric pressure, which makes things a lot harder. And then, in addition, we liquefied the oxygen product. We could have liquefied the methane too with an identical setup, but we didn't have the budget for that. And in any case, liquefying oxygen is actually a bit harder. So you could do one, you could do both. So this became now a true end-to-end system. Okay? Now, originally we were going to use a simple mechanical pump called a roughing pump that you can buy out of the catalog to gather the CO2 out of the thin Martian air, compress it down to one standard Rocky Mountain atmosphere of 12 psi, and feed it to the spotty A reactor. And that would certainly work. The problem was all the pumps you could buy out of the catalog that could do this at the rate to be required weighed on the order of 15 kilograms and used over 200 watts. Now, that's not to say that those pumps like that can't be made lighter and more energy efficient than that, but they're not, because there is currently no incentive for people making a laboratory roughing pump to try hard to reduce its power consumption. If it uses less than a kilowatt, no one cares in a terrestrial lab. And similarly, it doesn't really matter that it weighs 30 pounds, okay? Whereas it mattered to us. So we had an idea that we would take a very different approach, which we tried under company money to experiment. And this was called absorption pumps, which is absorption pump is basically a can that you fill with an absorbing medium, of which two examples you might use could be zeolite, which is a mineral. It's very popular for this purpose. It's a mineral that likes to absorb gases. Or alternatively, you can even use carbon, like in a fish tank filter system, okay, which is a more old-fashioned way to go about it. So we got some cans, we filled them with zeolite, and then what you do is you expose it to the gas you want to absorb at low temperature. Well, on Mars, there's low temperature available. Just let the thing cool down to typical Martian temperatures, especially at night. Nighttime Martian temperatures is minus 90 centigrade, okay, and you can count on that. So you expose this can to the thin Martian air at minus 90 C, and lo and behold, it will absorb CO2 like mad. Actually, there was no data in the literature for absorbing CO2 from a low-pressure environment of this kind, because what these things generally are used for is to purify effluents from stacks of chemical industry plants. They're operating at 1 bar and at high temperatures, in fact. So we didn't really know what was going to happen. Initially, when we opened this up to our Martian atmosphere reservoir, nothing happened, and some of the technicians thought, well, there's nothing going to happen, and the explanation given was that those thin atmospheres, it's happening, but it's happening real slow. Well, I said, well, okay, well, let's increase the pressure here. We eventually increased the pressure here to over a bar, and still nothing was on through. So it's clear they had a stuck valve. And once they opened that valve, what happened was this Martian atmospheric chamber has a pressure regulator on it to keep its pressure at exactly Martian pressures within a small tolerance. And each time you suck gas out of it, you got to put more gas into it, and the regulator clicks. You can hear it go click. As soon as that valve was open, and this was at Martian pressures, that valve started going click, 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 click. This thing just sucked it out of there like a tornado. Okay, it was fast. Okay, and within 1 hour at Martian daytime temperatures, it was able to suck enough gas to run our machine for 2 hours. At Martian nighttime temperatures, it could suck enough gas to run our machine for 9 hours. Okay. But originally we were working with daytime temperatures, and so we built 2 of these little pumps, and the idea is that you have one be cold, be exposed to Mars, suck in the gas. Then it would saturate, and then you close it off to Mars, and then you start heating it with an electrical heater. And when you heat it, the gas that's now trapped in there starts to come out of the zeolite, and it starts to pressurize. And in fact, it gets the pressure in there up to any pressure you want, really. You get quite high pressures. In fact, but we would take it up to 1 atmosphere or 17 psi or so. Be more than enough to feed CO2 into the Sabatier reactor. In the meantime, you'd let the other one get cold, so that while this one was putting out, this one would be taken in, and by the time this was exhausted, or long before this was exhausted, this one would be saturated and be ready to switch in for him when it was time, when this one was played out, and they could just play him back and forth. Then we had to get a refrigerator. Originally, we were going to get a laboratory refrigerator called the Gifford Command refrigerator, which is a big thing. It weighs about 40 pounds, and it used 300 watts, and it was okay, I suppose, but you really wouldn't send that to Mars, and it was quite a contraction. But we discovered that company, Magnavox actually, was currently making a run of small coolers for military tactical sensors, Stirling cycle coolers. This thing here is about 1.5 inches in diameter and 8 inches long, and it weighed 1.6 kilograms, 3 pounds. And it had all the refrigeration capacity needed to liquefy either our oxygen or our methane product. And it cost $10,000. It's a mil-spec item, which is pretty good, but it's a direct analog of a thing that TRW makes, which is exactly the same, but costs $600,000, and is space rated, and is going to fly in a mission critical role on EOS in the late 90s. So this is technology that can actually fly to Mars, and it's quite compact and elegant. And that was our refrigerator. So this is the total machine set up in the second generation. What you have here, this tank, big tank here, will be filled with Martian atmospheric gas at Martian temperatures, not pure CO2, but with all the nitrogen and argon impurities, and at the low pressure. Then here are the sorption pumps here on the side of the machine. And then this is once again the Sabatier reactor wrapped in some foam insulation, the condenser, the water collector bottle, the electrolyzer, and then this is the refrigerator up here, and this is the dewar in which we would store the liquid oxygen that we made. It would go up into there, and we could fill that up with liquid oxygen. And on this one, we had online chemical analysis of the effluent stream. On the old one, we actually had to take a grab sample and drive down the hill to the chemical lab and have them analyze it, and then tell us the next day how good you were doing today, which is rather tedious. And this one, you can just look on a computer screen and see right now you're getting 96% conversion, and you know this is the trace gases. So that was better. Once again, there's the dewar, there's the refrigerator, roughly the size of a Coke can. These are the sorption pumps. They were 1 liter, 1 quart each. Okay, and we would cool them with cold nitrogen gas to bring them down to Mars atmospheric temperatures, and then they'd be exposed to Mars atmospheric reservoir, and we just suck the thing in, just like an extremely dry sponge sucking in water. This is the team. Initial checkout of the system. And that's Larry Mason. He was the lead chemist. I was the lead engineer on the program. We had an online system to analyze what was going on. It's Larry Clark, the lead technician, in which you could look at, how much power the electrolyzer was using in the Sabatier, and what the flow rates were, and the pressures, and all this conditions on the machine. And we also, as I said, had online analysis of the chemical output. So I got a lot of data here. Basically, the sorption pumps required around 50 watts each. Well, 50 watts to run one or the other when they were being heated. But we could probably get that number down a lot, because the way we built them was we wrapped the heaters around the outside of the cans. If you put the heater inside the can, we wouldn't waste as much heat, and the power would come down a lot. The other advantage of the sorption pumps, you see, is they have no moving parts except for valves to open them and shut them. There's no whirling fans or pumping pistons or anything like that. So they're really quite reliable. And they absorb CO2 in preference to nitrogen or argon, so they purify the gas before it goes into your machine. You get, in other words, you take in Mars gas, and out comes pure CO2. Nitrogen is rejected, because in a sorption pump, the less cryogenic a gas is, the faster it absorbs. So on Mars, the thing that we want to absorb first is water vapor, except there is very little of that. To the extent you could get any of that, that'd be nice. But beyond that, the next thing we want to absorb is CO2. And then after that, well after that, argon and nitrogen. So it has a preference. And so once again, 50 watts in our current setup, but I think that could be cut down a lot. And one idea we have is actually putting the Sabatier reactor inside the sorption pump, which will be possible after we miniaturize it. And then the waste heat from the Sabatier reactor will be able to heat the sorption pump, and be able to run it with no power at all. The Sabatier power was around 40 watts, but as I said, that's a function of its oversize. We believe in our new generation machine, the Sabatier reactor will require no power after startup, and in fact, will have heat spare to use to drive the sorption pump. The electrolyzer was 120 watts, there's no way around that. And the liquefier was about 80 watts of power to liquefy the oxygen, although that would be a lot less on Mars because you're in a colder environment than Colorado, even in the wintertime. So that would come down. This plot shows the oxygen level building up in the viewer. And this is the total power, which was around 300 watts for the whole machine on average. The conversion efficiency, you can get different conversions as a result of turning the knob on whether you want extra hydrogen or extra CO2 going into the machine. We could get 96% conversion of both at the same time, or if we ran with extra hydrogen, we could actually get 99.9% conversion of CO2. Or if we ran with extra CO2, we could get 99% conversion of hydrogen. Interestingly, we did some experiments what happened was, to be accurate, we ruined one of our absorption pumps by letting some silicone get in, which got melted and ruined some of the zeolite. And the vendors who make the zeolite, which are fancy chemical companies, were saying, well, we can have some delivered to you in 2 months, provided, you get the order out this week, which of course would not happen. And it was hopeless. So we decided to try some activated carbon, which we got at the pet store, and it outperformed the zeolite by 2 to 1. This was the higher grade activated carbon, the $5 can stuff. So you want to use the better stuff. This is the summary of achieved performance. And you can see the absorption pumps had a total mass of 6 kilograms. They used 50 watts. We believe their mass can be reduced somewhat to about 3 kilograms and use no power, because we think we can use the waste heat from the Sabatier reactor. Sabatier reactor used, took 10 kilograms and used 50 watts. Here I'm saying we can cut it to 3 kilograms. That's extremely conservative. I think we can cut it to less than 1, and no power. The electrolyzer weighed 3 kilograms and used 120 watts, and I don't believe that can be substantially improved. The refrigerator weighed 1.6 kilograms and used 80 watts. On Mars, I think it would be the same, even though we have to refrigerate the methane as well because of the colder environment. We'd be able to get both of them with one refrigerator. Now, as I said, this machine was actually sized to do a sample return mission, and it is. In fact, it's 50% oversized against this mission design that you see here. This is a mission which could be launched on a Delta or perhaps even a Med-Light, which is something with half the capability of a Delta. We throw the spacecraft on direct trans-Mars injection. It does a direct entry at Mars. It lands on Mars. It makes propellant there in 500 days. And then it ascends and comes back and does a direct entry at Earth. And it's picked up on the ground in a cornfield in Kansas. It's or any place like that. This is the spacecraft in the little capsule, and as I say, that is actually sized to a Med-like shroud, a little smaller than a Delta shroud. Spacecraft on Mars. We did a formal costing of this mission, not a swag, but a detailed costing in the way that we would actually cost the mission that we would fly, because this is a mission that we would fly. And this thing is actually using a Mars Surveyor lander. You may know that Martin just won the contract to fly the Mars Surveyor landers in 1998, land on Mars, and all the follow-on landers. And this is an actual Mars Surveyor lander, except the ones we're flying now have just 2 panels. This adds another 2 panels. So we're using the same lander that we're using to do the Mars mission that we're flying in 1998. And that's the magic of making a propellant on Mars, that we can reduce the mass of a direct return spacecraft to the point where it's light enough you could actually land it on this puny little lander we're building for the 1998 mission. Okay? And the actual power requirement of this mission is around 160 watts. So in fact, it could be met with solar power, although I feel it would be much wiser to do this mission with an RTG, or any long-duration Mars mission with an RTG, because of the possibility of sand getting on your solar panels and dust and so forth, and obscuring them and degrading their performance. But we're going to learn that lesson in 1996 with Pathfinder, and I think after that we'll be able to go back to RTGs. But for now, it shows it could conceivably be done with solar power. In any case, here it is. We did a formal costing of this, and with a redundant spacecraft, everything is redundant as we would actually build a spacecraft. The total cost of this mission, including launch and flight operations, is $300 million. which is really a Pathfinder mission is in fact around $200 million and is much less potent scientifically than this. Now, if we went with a single-string spacecraft, we can get the mass of this mission down low enough to fly on a med light. The spacecraft also is cheaper, and as a result, the cost of that mission was around $260 million or so. And in fact, both of those missions could also be flown on a Russian Molniya, which is a much cheaper launch vehicle with about the same capabilities as Delta. And that would reduce the cost of the dual string mission to $260 million and the single string mission down to around $230 million, which are extremely affordable numbers for what amounts to as the premier Mars planetary mission of the whole science community, and one which would also prove the validity of making your own fuel on Mars so that we can use it on a Humans to Mars program. And I might add that flying this on a Delta, you have at 85% mass margin with a dual string spacecraft, and more than 100% mass margin on with a single string spacecraft. So there is absolutely no doubt that this can be flown on a Delta. So pretty much winds it up. This whole program that I showed you was done for a total cost of around $160,000 between both phases, which is ordinarily the amount of money which is spent on a study, drawing some view graphs and so forth. And yet we were able to make this thing work, achieve 96% efficiency, demonstrate some new technology even in the course of it. And my basic point about that is not that Martian are great chemical engineers. In fact, the opposite is true. Not a single person on this program was an actual chemical engineer. We had one chemist, and then we had a technician, and two aerospace engineers like myself, generalists. And the point there is that the fact that we could do this and make this work on this kind of schedule with this kind of money proves that it's easy. It is not hard. It is easy. Okay? And that if real chemical engineers were doing this, this could be done much smaller, lighter, cheaper, and not 96% efficient, but 99% efficient. In other words, the basic conclusion is that this will work. Thanks. I've got time for a few questions. Yes, sir. Well, if you wanted to have a fully redundant system, you'd have two of everything. No. You could use two sorption pumps would do it because, frankly, the best way to do this mission is to sorb at night and not run the chemical synthesis plant at night at all. So now take advantage of the low nighttime temperature to really sorb it up. And then in the daytime, when you have your solar power, then you run your electrolyzer, which is your big power hog, and your refrigerator, and so on. So you only need one sorption pump to make the thing go, but you have two to be redundant. Back.
Two questions. First off, how well does this scale as far as using it for?
Terrifically. That was one of the other reasons for choosing it. Okay, the zirconia process is very difficult to scale. It's based on little tubes, each about the size of your finger, and even for this level of output, you need like 1,000 of them. Okay, this thing, the Sabatier reactor, is basically a simple pipe, and to do a manned Mars mission, an actual full Mars direct mission, okay, that sort of Sabatier reactor would be a pipe around 3 feet long and 6 inches in diameter, and that would do the whole Mars direct. And as far as the electrolyzer is concerned, it would be something about the size of an office trash can, a cylinder about 2 feet tall and 1 foot in diameter. That would simply be done.
The other part of the question is, how do you deal with boil off? Since it takes a number of weeks or months or whatever to produce
Okay, your biggest
It looks
boil,
faster than
okay,
putting it in.
the biggest boil-off problem you have is on the way to Mars, where you have to store hydrogen during a 6 to 8 month one-way trip to Mars. So what you do is you heavily insulate the tank with multi-layer insulation, MLI, and you take extra hydrogen, more than you really need once you get there. And in fact, you could take 50% extra, and you probably only have 10% boil-off on the way there, and so you have plenty of margin to spare. Once you're there, the same refrigerator that is liquefying the methane and oxygen can keep it liquid. And in fact, the total amount of power needed to keep it liquid is only a small fraction of the power needed to liquefy it in the first place.
So many questions, I'll only take two. The size of the sample you want to bring back, and we heard rumor on Thursday that Mr. Golden had more or less promised that if you could get it down to the $300 million range, he would fund it.
That's correct. I briefed Golden on an earlier version of this, in which we had a 4 kilogram sample, and we at that time we were using an RTG because we were a larger return spacecraft, and we had a rough cost estimate at that time on the order of $500 million, which at that time was the lowest cost for a sample return mission ever proposed. And also, by the way, you got to realize this is a low risk way of doing a sample return mission, because there's only one spacecraft that can fail on you. In other words, the traditional way is to have a lander and an orbiter, and they have to rendezvous. Each one has to work, or the mission fails, as well as the rendezvous between them having to work. In this, there's only one that can fail, and there's no rendezvous maneuver. So it's low cost and low risk. Okay. Golden told me, he said, yes, if you could get the cost down to the mid-200s, you're on. Okay. So we went and designed this, and as a result, we went for minimalism here. We have a ½ kilogram sample, 1 pound, but that's still, you can have a pretty good rock collection for a pound of rocks, little rocks. And we did some other things to simplify the system. We have a simplified Earth entry capsule that doesn't use a parachute. It just passively decelerates to a low enough terminal velocity. It's made out of balsa wood. You can just take the shock when it gets to it. And that's all there is to it. But yes, this now puts the Mars sample return mission on the map. Yeah.
Bob, your mission diagram showed the direct descent to Earth with the Mars sample. Is there any reason why it couldn't aerobrake to an orbital facility to prevent possible back contamination, be analyzed up there?
Well, you can, but now you're introducing a whole new set of everything. You're introducing an orbital facility. You're introducing an orbital rendezvous maneuver. It's a lot easier to hit Kansas than the space station. It's bigger.
We could go get it though, right? I mean,
and it is my belief, okay, that it's more than a belief. It is a fact. I mean, because the boss told me so. Person told me. Okay, that the thing that will determine whether or not we do a Mars sample return mission is cost. And anything that can be done to bring the cost down needs to be done. To introduce an orbital rendezvous and an orbiting facility and all that will drive the cost up significantly. It also introduces perceived risk. It may seem strange. You say, well, what the hell? What if it landed if you'd be the same as where I am anyway? Okay, but that's not how they think. They think if you introduce a mission plan where it is supposed to avoid back contamination, go to an orbital facility, that means it must go to that orbital facility, because all of a sudden we're taking back contamination seriously. In which case now we have to have innumerable systems to guarantee that it will go to the orbital facility and nowhere else. And so everything becomes very hard. And let me just say one thing on the issue of back contamination itself. You got to understand that there is zero chance of there being threatening back contamination from Mars. And I mean 0 chance. The reason for that is that not merely that there is no life on Mars, okay, which is almost certainly true, okay, because the atmosphere is in equilibrium, there's no liquid water on the surface, and the surface is covered with oxygen, okay. It's that if there is life on Mars, it is impossible that it be a pathogen adapted to attack mammals. because there are certainly no mammals on Mars. And you gotta realize, we don't get diseases from anything but organisms that are very closely related to us. Basically, we get them from other people. Occasionally, we get them from other mammals, okay? We never get diseases from oak trees. I don't know a single person who's ever caught Dutch elm disease. And if you, next time you get a cold, sneeze on a tree and see if you get sick. All right, so I think I gotta wind it up. Thanks.